Right, I think we'll get started because I don't want to keep those who have been on since the beginning or early waiting any longer. So if for those who weren't on just at the beginning, unfortunately Kate's got a bit of a cough and we've decided to be really just a bit cautious this morning and not have her come in and join us. So apologies about that. Like I said right at the very beginning, please don't make this take me out experience where you all put your lights off and disappear on us. I've been working with Kate for about 14 years and often what she says I end up saying virtually the same time or very soon after, so we're pretty much aligned, and particularly the interviewing side of things, which is what the day is, the sort of session's all about today, is something that's close to my heart and something that I sort of train, nurture and develop my team on for the last 14 years. So we're really passionate and really close to that. So hopefully we can deliver you some great tips, some great ideas, and help you get to that point of when you do get an interview, you feel confident, you feel ready for it, you can ace it. Can I just check, and if there's anyone who's got a struggle, pop it in the comments, but can I just check you can all hear us okay? Last time we a couple of people were struggling with the sound, but we've got a nice new microphone, and hopefully we're as clear as a whistle today. A couple of people coming in. Thanks, Kate, all clear, yeah. And Sarah, great, fabulous. Thanks, guys. Perfect, that's good. Okay, so what we've done is we've taken all your questions that have come in so far. So I think we must have had about 22, 23 questions. So I really appreciate that. That helps us to really make sure we cover some content in this that's pertinent to you and hopefully covers those. Rather than flag them as individual questions as I go through, what we've done is we've put together a structure for it. We're just going to cover as an example, we're going to go through, apologies about my eyes, I've got to focus on the screen. We're going to go through some bits about research, about the brand and about the job role, make sure you're ready for that. Then a good chunk about preparing for your actual interview, the tips, some great tips on that, about interview answers, about understanding what kind of questions you're going to get and making sure you deliver your absolute best ones in the most natural and most positive way. So there's quite a good chunk on that. There's quite a few questions coming about that. John, you've added a question in about that yesterday, I think it was, that I've had this morning, about the time you take to do that. We're going to cover that in that section, but thank you for that question because it's a great question. We're going to then talk a bit more about preparation for the interview day. Adam has got some great examples that he's had some struggles with this week on video interviews. So Adam's going to share some of that with us, but we know there's a lot more video interviewing going on. So at the moment, that's really key. I think that we make sure we give you some hints and tips on that. That'll stop you falling into a few pitfalls that are out there. Then we're just going to cover a bit more off. We did touch on it briefly last time on our first webinar, but a bit about body language and interview style, because I think that's really important in the current climate, particularly when there's people who could be, a lot of people who are on today have been made redundant, so feeling frustrated, feeling a bit low, feeling like the world's against them, but we've got to make sure we get you through that, so we get that body language and that positivity through on the interviews. A little bit about closing the interview, making sure that there's anything else that you can give the interviewer, and then how to follow up, and potentially even how to manage and negotiate offers at the end of it. But I'm conscious we've now only got 55 minutes left, so we want to get straight into it. So if you have questions as you go along about anything we're talking about now, just put them on the chat, or the question and answers, whichever's easier for you. We'll look up, we'll make sure that, we'll add extra information in and try and answer those as we go. But hopefully with a bit of a structure to take you from the beginning to the end of the interview process, we'll get there, we'll get through it. So welcome everybody again, and yeah, thanks for joining us. Emma, do you want to kick off about the research side of things, yeah? Yeah,
so we've had quite a few questions about researching the company, the brand, and the job. But I think, people's natural first port of call is to go to the company website, which is great, but that should be very much your first port of call. It shouldn't be your end point. And there is so much information out there online. There's Glassdoor, which you can kind of get a much better understanding about culture. I would say tread with caution on Glassdoor. So Glassdoor is where employees put reviews about what it's like to work for the organisation. Often they can be quite disgruntled employees.
You very rarely get the positive people who work for a business. So I don't know how many people are on today who've ever used Glassdoor or commented, but historically it tends to be people who have left for a frustrating reason. So you're right.
I think what it does do though is you can see themes. So sometimes you'll see that there's an issue with leadership or management or strategy, whatever, because you'll tend to see a continuation of the same type of message on Glassdoor. So what I would say is tread with caution. Don't take it with a bit of a pinch of salt, but it's a useful tool in terms of understanding some of the cultural elements of an organisation.
We're going to talk later about questions to ask, questions that you're going to get asked in an interview, but also questions for you to ask of the company, and some of that research bit now about that. There's no reason why you can't ask I've read your reviews on Glassdoor, and I'd like to know more about that. There seems to be a few sort of similar themes, and maybe zoom in on one of them that's about culture or something, and then get them to answer. So it's a good questioning technique for later on.
Yeah, it's good. It's good research. There's so much out there. If it's a limited company, you can get kind of financial reports. You can kind of get information in terms of their AGMs. So there's lots of tools and techniques that you can do to really get under the sort of skin of the business, really. And I think particularly if it's a commercial business, and I always say I obviously sit within HR, but I always say that it's really good to understand the financials and sell that commercial acumen. So don't, just because you're in finance, look at the financials. If you're in any sort of role, I think it's really good to have an understanding of that business, because it shows that you've really got under the skin of it.
I think it's important with your research as well to, yes, do some historical data research and understand where the business is at, but it's always keeping your finger on the pulse. Now, if you're applying for lots of different roles and go to hopefully lots of interviews, that's going to be more of a challenge, but it's about staying focused on that. I've had numerous instances where people have gone to an interview and there's been sort of company results published that day or the previous day, and they've just not had their finger on the pulse just enough to know that that's come out. And that's really important, because I guess it just tells the interviewer how close you are and how much you're actually tracking and interested in their business. Absolutely. If we published our company financial annual results yesterday and you don't know about them, then that's
and a great way to do that is to just connect with them on LinkedIn. So follow the business on LinkedIn, get notifications coming in so that whenever they post anything, because normally they will post on things like LinkedIn if their results are out, etc. So just keep abreast of what that organization's doing. And I would say entrench yourself as best you can. So if it's if it's a consumer-based organization, go and buy something, feel the experience, go into the shop. If it's not, if it's a service-led organization, try your best to just put a call in and see what that customer experience feels like. Also really understand what their competitors are doing. I think we often very much focus our research on the organization, but I think it's really good to understand what competitors are doing out in the market, because then you can kind of have that really open conversation and that dialogue to say, I can see that X company is doing this. How are you responding? What's the impact that's had on your organization and the business? They seem to be doing that really well or not so well. So I think it shows that business acumen.
And I don't know where all your backgrounds are and what industries you're working in, but certainly as an example from a retail sector, anybody that we would send to interview that hasn't been in and done a store visit or really understood the business, and also these days understood the difference between their online, their e-commerce offering, as well as their in-store offering. If you're not au fait and up to speed with that, then the client's just not going to they're just not going to be impressed with the research you've done or lack of research. So it's really key.
And I would also say, just look at how they present that they use, and where possible, it's the same with body language. Mirror that language, mirror the way that they conduct themselves. So think about your dress code, really simple things, so that you're really feeling aligned with that organization. We often buy from people who are more like us, not necessarily always the right thing, but it's a fact of life. And I think it's about really showing that you've understood their culture. And it's also very important, I think, from a cultural match perspective, if that company doesn't feel aligned to who you are and your values. And I've worked in organizations myself where I've got in and kind of felt like a bit disaligned to the values, and it only gets worse from that point. So I think it's really good to understand, an interview for me is very much about a two-way process. So it's about, does it resonate with you when you read about that organisation? Does it feel like the organisation that you want to work for?
And I think the point about mirroring their culture and how they operate, I guess part of your preparation, we'll come to preparation a bit, but is making sure that you know their dress code for your interview. And I remember back in the day with recruiting for certain businesses, if you turned up in a suited and booted shirt and tie in a business that was very much a bit more dressed down, polo shirt style, a bit more casual, but your smart shoes and jeans, you'd almost look like you didn't fit in immediately. And you could be the best answers and everything else and done everything else perfect, but that piece of the jigsaw puzzle, an interview is literally from end to end, it's like a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, and it's about putting all those pieces in place. And
it's a weird thing. I think if you've ever done that, I've walked into somewhere, it's a bit like walking into a room when you're in fancy dress and nobody else is, and you feel really odd. And I think you get that sense if you walk in somewhere and kind of your dress code is very different to them. If you're overdressed essentially, you feel a little bit out of sorts, and I think there's a massive mindset piece in that as well. So if you're going through an agency, have that conversation, you know, what is the dress code, what would be appropriate for me to wear. If you are going direct to the organisation, there's no harm in trying to find that information out and asking, just so that you feel comfortable, because it's about fitting in, it's about feeling as relaxed as possible, rather than, you know, kind of feeling a little bit out of key.
Yeah. Matt, you've asked the question, do we cover assessment centres? I will add some of that into the bit where we do about the interview preparations side of things, so I'll throw something in there as well. In fact, I think we've covered some elements of it, but no, it's a good question, so I will make sure we cover that, Matt.
So I mean, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add in terms of.
I think I guess this is probably one more from an experience of actually the amount of candidates that go into interview and have probably missed this bit as part of their research, but they've probably read the job description right at the start of when they've entertained applying for the role. They've then gone away and done the research about the business, but have failed to revisit the job description and really fall foul in the interview of being able then to articulate actually what the job role involves and entails.
And how they match to it.
So really making sure that actually that is revisited
Absolutely.
later on in the research.
And a really top tip for that is to get a highlighter pen, go through and really highlight all of the key buzzwords, the language that they use on a regular basis through the job description. You know, there'll be words like leadership or engagement or, you know, analysis, and you can start to get a real sense, and that will really start to help you plan your responses to the questions, because you know where they're going to hone in as well. So I think it's really important.
A quick tip that we heard the other day, someone came across, was, you know, printing off at the beginning of that process. Adam just said then, I suppose I know a lot of people are applying for a lot of roles at the moment, so I guess it's a case of making sure that you're trying to ahead of the game, but keep those job descriptions and keep them, you know, in a file with the application, the role you've applied for. So when you do come to getting that interview, you've got all that information there. So it's just a top tip of almost that organisation piece to keep it in one place. So you've got that from the outset. That would be really helpful for you.
And again, I think, you know, similarly to researching the company, I think when you're looking at the job description, think about the language. How do they describe things? What sort of tone of voice do they use? Because it'll give you an idea about the culture, about the organisation. And again, if you can mirror that kind of language, and it can be really simple things. The difference between staff and colleague or employee can be quite a different thing, and every organisation is different in the way that they position that. But again, it's a real cultural match piece, so I think that's quite important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Ellis, you've dropped a load of questions on, and what we're going to try and do is I will try and, when we get to a section where I can cover one of those off, I'll make sure that that we do. And if I don't, then I'm more than happy to pick up a conversation separately. You've just put 7 questions on in one hit.
Wow.
So I'm like, my eyes struggle with one question. So I've got 7 in one go. So let me try and filter those at the same time as concentrating on the stuff we're delivering. And if I don't cover anything, like I said, I'm more than happy to pick up afterwards. I can sense some of your frustrations with some of your applications and some of the responses or lack of responses out there. I completely feel and understand that, but I'm happy to pick up separately on some of them. But where I can, I'll cover them off, okay?
And just finally, I was going to say, I think when you're looking at the job description, think about where your strengths are, so where you really align in terms of strengths, but also really think about where your potential weaknesses and development areas are within the job description. And don't be afraid to kind of call those out, because you know that they're going to hone in on them, because if you've identified them, the chances are that they've identified them as well. So don't be afraid to kind of pull that conversation, and don't let it be an elephant in the room when you're having your interview. So
yeah, it's almost about being open about those, that
absolutely.
You realise that perhaps that's one skill area that perhaps you're not as strong as in others in other areas, but you kind of feel that, you know, you tick all those others and be able to you know, to I guess overcompensate in those areas.
And we'll come on to that a little bit more when we talk about kind of questions as well. So.
Fine. Okay. So research-wise, if you've got any questions on researching, I think it's fairly straightforward. It's about different sources, as much information as you can, you know, pulling the facts out. If there's any questions about research, then pop them on, and we can kind of come back to them as we move on. But I think next is probably moving on to, and this is where we've had the majority of probably questions come in, has been about sort of the preparation for the interview itself, the questions. You know, how do you prepare for interview questions, and how do you put yourself in the most relaxed place, knowing full well you've got this stuff in your mind, rather than actually, you know, going in not knowing what you're gonna get asked. So, Emma, from a point of view of that preparation for that, what, as far as understanding what it is you need to, what you might get, what would you suggest for that?
So the first thing I would say is it's so important to prepare, but don't over prepare. I think there's a fine balance. I've been in lots of interviews where people sound very robotic because they've they've practiced the response. And I think I've said this before on videos that I've done. What happens is you stop listening. So I think it's really important to have a series of different responses to different types of questions. So think about customer experience or leadership as a generic, sorry, my glasses are falling off, as a generic question, and then have a number of different types of responses that you can prepare, so you can tailor them. So don't just have one response to customer service, for example. Have a couple of different types of questions that would suit in different ways, and listen to the question that is asked and then respond appropriately. Because I think naturally, what we do is we hear the word customer service and we go, oh, brilliant, I've researched this one, I've prepared for this, and then we just...
Well, Adam, you had that, didn't you, the other day? We had a couple of candidates interviewed on video interviews, and the feedback afterwards was that they'd kind of, the minute they were asked a question that they thought they know, and they went straight into the everything operational, didn't they? Whereas they didn't cover off the leadership and how they went about it. Is there anything more you want to share on that?
Yeah, some like the couple of examples the other day. There was almost a bit of, they heard a particular word and kind of started going down a particular avenue that didn't actually answer the initial question, but also then there's that bit of them when they were probed, actually, where the interviewer was really looking for the leadership skill set that's enabled them to demonstrate how they delivered it, how they interacted with the team, to kind of work on whatever it was that they were sort of focusing on. Actually, they really only delivered the kind of operational elements, and there wasn't that balance of kind of, you know, the what and how they've delivered it. I guess kind of was probably the big kind of downfall for them in terms of...
And if you can think about the STAR structure, so situation, task, action and result, that's a really good, particularly if it's competency based, is a really good way to structure your responses in terms of the response to the questions that you're being asked. I know John's asked about the amount of time you should spend. So John had asked a question about interviewers only actively listen to respond to 45 seconds. So how do you kind of overcome that? Because it doesn't seem like a very long period of time.
We talked about this before, John. It's a great question. And I think my answer to that is I wouldn't be hung up on a time. It's about being engaging. So if, you know, we talk about this method, you call it STAR, I call it something different. We all have our own thing. Go and Google it, you'll find a million different methods. I call it situation, action, result. I like simplicity. 3 things is easier for me to cope with rather than 4, you see. But when you're talking about a scenario of an answer, you're talking to me about the exact place, the business it was in, the team it was, the project that you were managing, the person that you were developing, the person in performance managing. The minute you tell me something real about the situation, I'm engaged with you. It feels like it's a real situation, so it feels like you're telling me a real story about a real time. And then ultimately, I still want to know I want to know enough detail. My best advice with anything, and God, I was taught this in when would it be?
Oh, you're showing your age now.
I know I'm showing my age now, but I was taught this in somewhere like 1994 by a store manager, and I had to have my very first ever competency interview with give examples, and I couldn't for the life of me get my head around it. And he said, just go away in and write down everything longhand about a situation. So think about when you manage the performance of that person. Just write it all down, everything. Don't stop. Just write everything. Then afterwards, get a highlighter pen and highlight the actual facts, the things that matter, the things that are in there that are actually the points that you really want to deliver. And then once you've done that, put them into that format of, actually, there was a time when, and this was the issue. And actually, the things I did, my actions, were these things. And actually, at the end of it, the outcome was this, and I either developed the person or I had to dismiss them, or whichever way the example went. And that could be for service, for leadership, for management, for delivering KPIs. It could be for anything. But that simple format, but the way it helped me was just to write it all down. Now, typically, if you don't prepare, what you're going to do is go into an interview, and instead of writing it all down, you're going to say it all. And John, your point exactly is that when will a recruiter switch off, or when will an interviewer switch off? If all they're getting is just bombarded with endless amount of information with no structure, that is when they're going to switch off. However, if you've done that pre-work, that pre-exercise stuff beforehand and pulled it together, then you're going to hit the ground running. One other tip on that as well is, it's almost like you've got to go through an entire process of preparation. So you've got to write it all down. You've got to pull it back into your situation, action, result. But then when you go in, exactly back to your point earlier, Emma, about not being robotic, often when you do that, you'll then, every answer almost semi-sounds the same. Oh, well, I can tell you, the situation was this, and the actions I took were that, and the result was the other. Almost then forget talking situation, action, result as your signpost, but then just talk about what actually those scenarios, and then it comes across as not rehearsed, not overly prepped, not transcripted. We get, numerous times, God, if I had £1 for every time in the last 15 years of being in recruitment that someone said, they just sounded too polished, they sounded over prepped, over polished, and actually they were just giving their answers about them, but it just came across as too robotic and too much.
And I think there's a massive one. I learned a big lesson very young in my career, where I'd been put into an interview where I had nobody thought I was going to get this interview at all, and lo and behold, I did. I was successful, and I asked the question why at the end, because I was the least qualified person for this role. And the response back was that I'd just been authentic, I'd been completely me, and everybody else that had come in had been robotic. And I think, let your personality shine. People buy people. And however much we've tried to put science behind recruitment processes, it's still a human process. And I think we forget that, and I think we over tailor it sometimes. But at the end of the day, if you build rapport and you engage with somebody, that has a massive impact. And I know I've certainly recruited people that I felt a connection with over and above experience, because in my opinion, you can teach skill and technicality. You can't teach desire, personality. That's there or it's not in a lot of cases. And I think, just focus on that connection. You can make mistakes in an interview and still be successful, because someone will buy you as a person. So don't lose that sense of who you are. Be authentic. Because the reality is, you've got to go in and work there every day. So if you try and be someone that you're not, you're going to really struggle to keep up that persona anyway. Absolutely. So don't be afraid to be you.
A couple of other real things about what to expect. You can do as much preparation as you like, and then you might think you're going to get a really formal, structured interview. You've been given the advice by the HR person who's arranged your interview. We're going to do, we interview around 6 or 7 key competencies. So you're sitting and think it's going to be really structured. Everybody you go and meet will probably interview different. So Emma would interview different to how I would interview, and probably interview slightly different to how Adam would. So it's about being prepared and ready for that. So within a business, you could have one person who's not that overly experienced at interviewing and will sit behind those 6 or 7 competencies and ask it in a very structured way. So can you give me an example of, and note it all down and not ask you any probing questions, where you could have exactly the same competencies tested and think you've just come out and had a chat. Now, that happened to me once years ago in my Safeway career, and I went for 2 very similar jobs. I didn't get one, and I got the other one within the business. And the second one, I was like, well, how the hell did I get that? Because it just felt like I'd had a chat. And I thought I just was lucky in the end, but I was so impressed that the guy who interviewed how he got the information out to me. When we were out and about a few weeks later, I said, how did I get the job? Because you didn't ask me the competency questions I expected. I was amazed. He went through the conversation we'd had and how he tied things back to competencies. And I think because I'd prepared some great answers around service, around people, around leadership, around delivering numbers and KPIs and coaching and developing people, when he asked me just what I felt were normal sort of everyday situations, those things were coming out as part of that conversation. And he regurgitated virtually the whole interview back to me. So, well, when I asked you about this, you mentioned that, and I was just amazed how he tied it back. The point is, you don't know what you're going to expect when you get there, when you get in there. So if it feels conversational, rather than give me specific examples, then it's not a bad thing just to almost try and check back in your mind that you are giving some of the detail that you've pre-prepared and that you've got in your mind about certain scenarios, so that you do make sure there's you feel like you're getting some good content in there.
And I connected with somebody on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, and her approach was to just go for a walk with somebody. That was the way she interviewed, which I thought was an absolutely amazing idea. Because you get to know the real person, people's barriers come down. So don't be surprised if people throw like a bit of a curveball and just kind of go with it. You can prepare the best, and then someone will do something random that throws you a little bit.
Ellis, so, you've asked a question. Could you ask and steer the structured, dry interview into a conversational discussion one? And would that annoy the interviewers to disqualify you? I think it's about building rapport. So if you've got someone who's just literally asking you very, very straightforward, structured interview answers, I think if you try and take them off in a completely opposite direction, that is you're probably going to get marked down. You know, and don't forget, they all have sort of probably scoring structures and matrix of how they'll score answers. And so if you're not giving what they're looking for, you're likely to score down on that. As an example, we were told the guy that one of Adam's candidates that was interviewed today, he really liked him, but because he'd kind of not answered the questions, he felt that he was going to score down on some of those areas. And that's a shame, because he could actually be right, but just because he's not given the detail they were looking for and asked, he could miss out. So I think you've got to build rapport. Interviewing is all about building rapport, and it's about mirroring that person. And if it feels like you're able to have more conversational sort of engagement, then take it down that way. If you feel like it's very structured from them, I would advise to continue down that route.
It's about that mirroring again. I always struggle with that because I can't say my R's. So yeah, I think mirror what they're doing, how they're interviewing. If they're very formal and very structured, then that's kind of probably the way they are. Or you know, the way the interview is just being presented. So don't try and sort of drive that.
But don't read that as boring, because if they're structured, don't read that as then not showing where you can a bit of personality as well. So within your answer, still try and show that personality. You know, and try and get some of that across.
We've had a few questions from people who are introverts that kind of struggle with that natural rapport building. And what I would say is, I know it's really difficult for people who are introverts to sort of drive that real rapport build and to sort of drive conversation sometimes, because you kind of want to retreat into yourself, particularly when you're out of your comfort zone. I don't think there's any harm in kind of calling that out and just saying early on in the interview, you know, I am an introvert. This is not me at my best, but actually what I can bring is I'm brilliant at doing this, 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 and this. And talk about your skills. So kind of call it out, because I think if people understand that and realise why you're probably not giving as much, then they accept that and acknowledge it. And the chances are, if you're an introvert, you're more likely to be in a role that type of personality fits. So it's probably not, you know, it's not going to be completely out of odds.
Ellis, I'm glad we answered that question for you. Absolutely fine. So I've answered one of your questions so far. Hopefully, one of your. Well, no, that was your 8th question. So you're cracking on with them. So yeah, but I'm glad we've answered that one, and I have got an eye on them before they go off the top of the screen. I promise I'll still keep coming back to them. Right, what we thought we'd do now is you've prepared for the questions that you're going to get, those questions you're going to get asked. But we thought we'd cover some of the probably the initial questions that often get asked that sometimes set off on the wrong foot as well when you ask them. Adam, do you want to just, there's a classic question at the beginning of an interview, so tell me about yourself. Adam, do you want to kind of cover that off, because it's a common area where people can make some straight away make some almost sort of schoolboy errors, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think, you know, ultimately I guess the biggest schoolboy error is everyone automatically goes down the work avenue to the tell me about yourself question, and probably underestimate, a lot of candidates often underestimate the importance of this question, because actually it's that first opportunity to really build some rapport with the interviewer, to let them see a bit of your personality, let them see a bit about you. And it genuinely is, they want to know about you outside of work. It's not the work stuff at that point. It's about you, family life, hobbies, what your interests are, to really start building that rapport, finding that common ground. And I guess it's something that kind of early in my career, I remember getting feedback from a head of when I was interviewed, and he said, why did you tell me about your career when I asked you about yourself? And I was like, because I thought that's what you wanted to hear. And he was like, no, I want to know what I'm going to talk to you about when I come and do a store visit in your shop.
Yeah.
I want to be able to ask you how your daughter is, how your cycling's going and stuff. And I guess it's something that a lot of candidates kind of fall into the trap of, going straight down, talking through the CV.
Yeah, it's a massive, hugely common mistake. I'd say probably 50% of people who go in can probably easily make that mistake and shoot off straight away. Well, I currently work for, I used to work for, and no, just talk to them about you. It's common ground, it's rapport building piece.
Yeah, and I think, you know, your hobbies, the things that you do outside work say a lot about you, and give a real insight into your personality,
and your values
you know, all of that stuff. So I think it's a really useful thing for an interview, and like you say, it can create that really common ground. I've had full interviews on, you know, by that question, because I've done quite a lot of travelling with wildlife stuff, and I've tracked grizzly bears and things, and people kind of get a bit obsessed with that stuff, and then the whole interview is about, you know,
bring it back to actually, I've got some questions I need to ask you now.
So, you know, I think it does create that ability to then build that rapport. So definitely.
No, and then there's nothing wrong with, once you've done that bit, then moving it on to work. But I would almost in that early stage, keep it almost top line. Talk about who you are, what you're passionate about, what you most enjoy doing, what brings you the most satisfaction in the role that you do. You know, before you start going into loads of nuts and bolts, and often you don't need to go into nuts and bolts. It's about who you are. It's about you. That's what they're trying to find out. That's why they're asking. Tell me about yourself, because that's what they're looking for. Yeah.
And then often, so you've the self bit, and then it's to talk me through your CV.
Yeah.
Now, this is sometimes a point where I want to die in an interview, because people literally will go, and in, you know, 1854, I was working for.
That's me, by the way, thanks.
And you just think, oh, I didn't really necessarily mean I needed every single job that, you know, and as I started off and I was, you know, paper rounds, blah, blah. That's not what they're looking for. What they're really wanting is to understand, in the most recent years, probably sort of 5-6 years, what have you been doing, and how does it relate to the job that you've been applying for? So really concentrate in the most recent stuff that you've been doing, and what you've achieved. So they don't want to know, you know, I get in the morning and turn my computer on and then I do X, Y, and Z. It's about what have you achieved, what have you delivered, what difference have you made, what have you brought to the table really for that organisation, and focus on that, because otherwise you just end up giving a list of responsibilities and it's so dry as an interviewer. You know, I can read all of that stuff on your CV. I don't want you to talk through every single element, because I can read that and I can find it out. So it's just about the really key important things. What is the message that you're wanting to get out about your CV?
And I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, you know, if you're in marketing, you know, I got the bug for marketing when I was at uni, and I did an intern, you know, as an intern for a year with IBM or something like that, and I just got it was something that really interested me. So I've kind of followed, you know, my marketing career's developed from there. I like that, because if that tells me you've got some real passion and your heart's in that industry, you know, and I start, you know, and I'd said exactly the same. I started in retail as a Saturday kid, but I just got it. I loved it. In fact, I enjoyed that more than I enjoyed college, and it kind of grew. And then I got on the training program, and then, you know, so let me fast forward to 12 years after, you know, I've done lots of various elements of roles. Let me fast forward to my most recent career, which is this, and this. Yeah. And I think then it shows that for me, that's positive. Get that passion for what you do across, because, you know, 9 times out of 10, guaranteed, someone's going to take the person for their role that showed passion for the industry, what it is that they're doing, because that rubs off. Passion for the job and passion for everything you do just becomes infectious, and it'll rub off on those people around you.
I think as well, particularly at the moment, there's lots of people who are changing careers, having to do a bit of a shift, because the industry that they're working in has been significantly hit by COVID, etc. So this is where I think it's about transferable skills and really starting to bring that stuff out. And like you say, if you can go back to that passion. So why are you now taking that shift? What is it about this role that really interests you, and why have you made that connection? I think that's really important.
If you've done that research bit right at the very beginning, and you've kept that job description, and you know what those transferable skills are, we're talking real relevant stuff now that can kind of, you know, that can compute to why you're here. The other thing I'm going to talk about just and touch on is, for a lot of people who are on here, it's because they've been made redundant. And so when we go to this next job interview, we're going to be in a situation where we've been made redundant, and that's frustrating. And it's been, it's I guess caused lots of stress, some upset, disappointment, and all the rest of it. What we've got to do at this stage, though, is we've got to park that. We've got to almost leave that at the door. And I think if you're being interviewed by a business that will know that you've been made redundant, don't not talk about it, but say, look, it's happened. It is what it is. COVID's been a massive issue for lots and lots of people. Do you know what? Yeah, I probably felt knocked down and really disappointed and let down for a period of time. But I've parked that now. This is now about the future. I'm seeing this as a really positive opportunity. Yeah. It could actually be the springboard to me changing industry. That's why I'm here today, because I've got this opportunity. Looks amazing, yeah. And I love everything about your brand. I've done so much research and reading up on you. But sell it back in a positive way. But I think that's about taking the lead and showing that passion, rather than saying, okay, so why are you here today? Well, I've been made redundant, and then we're on a back foot straight away. Let's get in there with it straight away and just show that you've dealt with it. Yeah. You might still be feeling really under the surface, kind of quite, wounded, but let's just park that and make sure that we're absolutely then thinking positive, new steps, forward steps. Let's get on. Let's get the career moving, and let's give our best of ourselves in that interview. So we've definitely got to do that.
Another question that you are often asked is the dreaded "what are your weaknesses?" question. So, and I think that's a very common one. Yeah. And years ago, I remember being told, just say you haven't got any. I wouldn't advise that at all. We've all got weaknesses. There's absolutely no harm in having weaknesses, and we've all got areas of development. And I think for me, it's about not avoiding that. It's been about upfront, but it's how you position it. So rather than kind of focusing on maybe personality flaws, things, focus on skills that you need to develop and learn, rather than I'm not a very good at blah. Yeah.
Or skills, preferably skills that you've already done something with changing. Yeah. So, a great example is I'm the world's worst. Emma will tell you, and she'll take the mickey out of me non-stop. But I'm the worst at delegating in the world, because I like to get it done. I like it done right. I'm just terrible at doing it. However, a couple of years ago, one of the key things that it clicked for me, I spent some time with a coach to try and help me just get myself through. Why I've been doing this for 30 years. I need to change. I need to do something different. And it was a technique I came up with in that scenario. But he asked me what I could do differently. And basically I said, well, every time I have a to-do list that's got far too many to-dos on, which is typical, I write another column next to it that says development opportunities. And so for every one of those, I look and say, well, is that a development opportunity for anyone in the business? And if I can give that to them, that's great for them, because it'll give them a stretch, give them something new to do, make them feel good about themselves. But also, it's off my to-do list, and it will hopefully never come back on it, because they'll take care of that. Now, I slip back and I do all the rest of it, but thank you. But if you're talking about that as a weakness for what you've done and how you've tackled it and what you've done about it, that's real positive.
Yeah. And a weakness can be a strength. So one of my weaknesses, which I've had lots of feedback about over the years, is that I am a really passionate person, and I get very passionate about things. And because I'm passionate, I assume that everybody else is as passionate about that subject as I am. And I can bore people to death on certain things. So I have to be really conscious that if I'm massively passionate, I have to read the room. And because I'm really passionate, I often will lead the conversation a lot. So I built a technique that if I know that I'm kind of overly offering and being overly passionate, and I need to kind of rein it in, I just sit on my hands, because I physically can't talk without, you probably see, without kind of using my hands. So that's a technique that I've built, and I do that, and I really consciously do it. And I've also shown a lot of other people that technique, and it really works for them. So I think you can be very aware of your development, and actually my passion is my strength and my weakness.
Yeah, and it is for a lot of people.
So I think it's about being aware of it, and it's being conscious. And I slip back in. I see it in myself sometimes, and I think, oh, Emma, shut up, give somebody else a chance, to talk. And I think it's really important. So it's not about not embracing it. I think it's just having that awareness.
Yeah. And just going back to one of the questions we received before we started today about the career history piece, and I think we've said, go back on the most recent. So I would always qualify once you've done that. If you'd like me to go back further, then more than happy to, because so they don't think, well, why did they not cover that bit? In interviewing, it's always about trying to just make sure that you've covered everything off. So always offer, look, I can go back further if you wish, but I just thought I'd kind of focus on the most recent relevant roles and do that. One of the things, and this is almost, I'm throwing this in because you would, it might help you on your interview question preparation, but also actually just point of view, maybe go back and review your CVs. So I was taught a technique years ago, and it's called the SFW test. And I shall reframe it today for you because we're on video. It's the so flipping what test. And essentially, it's about going back and looking at your CV. And if you're, I don't know, if you're a branch manager and your CV says like I open and close the store, I do the staff rotas. Well, if I'm a recruiter, whether I'm recruiting from a brand, whether I'm an agency, whoever it is and what I'm interviewing, I know that if you're a branch manager, you should do staff rotas and you probably open and close the store. So those things shouldn't even ever be anywhere near a CV. But if you end up doing a CV talk through based on stuff that's on a CV that doesn't pass that SFW test, then you're already setting yourself up for a bit of a fall when you start going through it. So tell me about your most recent role. Well, I'm a branch manager and I open and close the store. And I don't want any of that. So it might be just a good probe, a good sort of prompt to go back and review CV and make sure it actually tells you about you, it tells you about what you do. It should be more about achievements, more about deliverables, more about things you've done. Rather than the sort of the basics of a role, An area manager, I look after 15 stores. Great. I'd maybe summarize area manager in brackets 15 stores at the top of the CV, but that wouldn't be one of the points I'd put in there. I look after a team of 250 people and I've developed 30 people to managers in the last 18 months. That for me then is something that really tells me as a recruiter, this is the kind of person I want to speak to, rather than the same as all the others. I think on the first webinar we talked about standing out from the crowd and being different, and it's those extra things on your CV that will do that. One thing we did again, I'm just going back to some of the questions we've had. One of the other key things is somebody asked a question, said, should I say we or when I'm doing an interview, because people have told me previously I should say I do this and I do that, but it feels like I'm then being very insular and very selfish and not thinking and showing about my team and how I achieve things through people. It's clearly important, hugely important to achieve. You'll never achieve anything in any role really unless you do it through your team. But what interviewers want to know is what you bring to the table, what you bring, what you do, what you drive. So what I don't want is somebody who does everything because their company says we do this, we do this, we do this, we do this. So I would always start an example of, well, actually, I can give you an example of this. So, I took on the responsibility for delivering this project, or I went to this role and there was some real issues around productivity or around KPI performance or whatever. So I identified what they were, I broke them down, I came up with a sort of set of priorities, and then I engaged my team, and then it becomes we. Because it was the team that then delivered. You got them on board and then they helped you to deliver those solutions to those problems. So you turn I into team and then it becomes all inclusive. But what I want to know and what your interview wants to know is that you did it. Because the minute you say, well, actually, we did this and we did that and we did, and it's like, well, who's we?
What did you do?
Who's actually driving this? And where's the passion to improve this coming from? And where's the passion to deliver this result coming from? So that I and we is a common mistake. I mean, a really common mistake. But someone asked that they struggled with that. So, and I think, again, if you're practicing, and again, one of the things is someone mentioned earlier about, one of the questions about, I've been told to practice in front of my parents or friends, but feel uncomfortable in doing that. But what you'll feel, I would imagine, far less uncomfortable doing that with your friends and family than you might do when you're actually in the interview. So it's good to do that initially and feel like you're able to say, I did this, I did that, and feel more confident. Definitely. So there's just a couple, apologies I keep looking down, but I'm just going back through all your questions that you've put on, and I'm just trying to make sure we pull in those answers, because they're all really just simple tips, but they can be the difference in an interview between going out. Your last thing you want is you go out and interview and I'm not really sure whether he drove that or whether she delivered that. What do we think? How much was that her or him versus the company saying this is what we're going to do? So just another example.
Definitely.
Anything else on the weaknesses?
I don't think so.
No. Cool. Okay. So the next bit we moved on to is about asking questions of yourself, then having questions ready to ask the interviewer. Emma, thoughts on that then?
Yeah, so I think it's always important to ask. I know if Kate was here, she would be saying it drives her mad if she's interviewing and somebody doesn't ask her a question. I think it's really important to make sure you have got questions. I think what often happens, if you've got a really good interviewer, they'll often answer a lot of the questions that you'll have. So I often take a pad and a pen in, and I just make little notes as I'm going through. And if I feel like they genuinely have answered all my questions, I will kind of say, could you just elaborate on this, rather than not having anything to ask. But I think it's vital that you do have.
Or you could also refer back. So I actually was going to ask you about X, but you've actually answered that question for me. So again, it shows that you've listened. It shows you've listened, absolutely, but it also shows you did have questions to ask. So because that not having questions is just not great. Yeah.
And I think, don't be afraid to ask difficult questions. I think often we kind of say, the questions I always get asked is, could you just tell me again about what development opportunities are, or what training do you offer? And you kind of get a bit sick as an interviewer of kind of walking through those things. So, I love to be challenged in an interview. I love for someone to ask me a question that really gets me thinking. Some of the types of questions that you can ask are, values-based stuff. So I've been asked before about, your values, looking at your website from research that I've done are X, Y, and Z. They feel like they're really aligned to me as an individual, but how do they resonate? How do they display themselves on a day-to-day basis within the organisation? And how do you live those values? Sometimes it's really useful to put it back onto the interviewer and say, what do you think about this? So what's your personal opinion? Because you'll again start to build that rapport. What do you think success looks like in this role within the next 6 to 12 months? What would I be doing if I was really successful in this role? So it's about getting them to give you something back as well.
And one of the greatest questions for those that time for me is always, what you've worked for the business for 5 years or 10 years. What is it that you enjoy about the business? What is it that kind of keeps you, engaged in the business? What is it that you love about it? And then you'll often get that more sort of heartfelt kind of response and real response from somebody, which will generate a conversation. And I suppose at this stage of an interview, it's really about hopefully building on the rapport you've built so far and continuing that.
And I think there's a couple of things I always say to my candidates about questions at the end of an interview. Actually, it is that final opportunity to leave that lasting bit of your personality and that final impression. It's just as important as that first impression when you walk into the room. And actually, the questions that are more engaging and really kind of do leave that positive impression are those that either provoke that individual's kind of opinion or thought or experience, opposed to the stuff that you can go away and research yourself. And the training and development question example that you talked about there, Emma, I used to hate that in my retail management days. If someone asked it me, and I'd give them the most politically correct, dull response, because actually it's not an engaging question. You can find that out for yourself. So those questions that provoke opinion or experience are much more engaging.
And don't ask the holiday, how many holidays and what's the salary I'm likely to get. Ignore all of that kind of stuff. Matt, you might just want to pop an answer on and I'll come to you. I'm conscious we've only got 10 minutes left. You mentioned about assessment centres. I could talk about assessment centres for like another hour if you wanted me to. Is there anything specific you would like me to address for assessment centres? If you put anything else on there, I'll make sure I just cover those couple of points. We're going to just do a bit of day of interview prep stuff now. But Matt, I'll promise you, if you pop anything else on there, I'll try and zoom in on those for a couple of minutes once we've done this next section. That'd be great.
Any killer questions that you would always kind of recommend asking? Anything else?
Of
you asking of the interviewer?
Well, I suppose you potentially, for me, we've got this as a section after, which is about closing the interview. But I want to know if there's anything else. Is there anything else that they would like to know more about myself or my experience? Because often you get the situation where your competency questions, if it's more of a structured interview, have almost maybe not given you the chance to throw something in or get something in there that's relevant. I think if you've also made sure that you've done your research on the job profile and job description, and you feel there's something that's really pertinent to you that you're really excited about that role, then it might be worthwhile asking a question about that. I've noticed this was on the job role. How does that look? What does that look like in the business? How big an issue is that in the business at the moment? And then start to engage in a conversation that you're really confident in. So that's another thing. But I guess that closing thing about is there anything else I could give you is definitely key to me. Okay. Adam, do you want to do a bit about day of interview stuff?
Yeah. So I think we've talked about kind of preparation for the actual interview, but I think it's also really important to think about preparation for the actual day, and it doesn't start on that morning when you get up, regardless of what time your interview is that day. I think it's really important to make sure that you've got everything ready the night before and in advance, from a point of view of, that you've got all your clothes ready, that you've got no last minute kind of issues. Nothing worse than pulling that shirt out of the wardrobe and realizing that you've got a brown sauce stain on it from the bacon roll you had last week or something. But really making sure you've got those bits ready the night before, and that you can get up and not have to stress about those bits. Everyone's nervous for an interview, hopefully healthy nerves. But actually, you don't want to give yourself extra stuff on the morning to worry about. Also, really important to make sure that you've planned your journey and you know where you're going. And if you can, try and do a practice run so that you know kind of how much impact traffic's going to have if it's not a route you're used to. So that again on the day you're not rushing and kind of leaving yourself running short, and that blind panic of, am I going to be there on time? Am I going to have the opportunity to nip to the loo when I get there? And to
it's all about de-stressing, isn't it? It's all about putting yourself in the most relaxed.
There's certain things. So if I'm wearing a skirt with tights to an interview, I'll always have a spare pair of tights with me. I'll always have some tissues with me.
I always take my spare pair of tights as well.
Always have a hair bubble.
Always need that.
All of those things. But I think it's really important, because there is genuinely nothing worse than getting to an interview and feeling that you've got something that's kind of going to draw attention to you in the wrong way. So I think it is really, make sure you've got an umbrella. I know there's probably less face-to-face interviews happening at the moment, but just think about all eventualities. You don't need the kitchen sink, but I think just be realistic.
I'm just conscious we've only got 6 or 7 minutes left, so I'm conscious of us really trying to keep things moving. There's one point that we're going to answer about somebody asked on one of the pre-questions, but Matt, you've mentioned something as well. So on one of your questions about assessment centres, which I'm going to try and cover off at the same time. So just remember, when you do arrive for an interview, from the moment you arrive, you're being assessed. So that person who signs you in, that person who takes you to the room, that person who engages in conversation with you, all of those elements are being assessed. Matt, that's exactly the same on an assessment centre. One of the biggest single sort of bits of advice I'll give about assessment centre is the minute you walk in to the minute you walk out, you're under assessment all the way through. So you might do an exercise in this room, or you might get taken to another room to do an exercise, and you might have a conversation with the person who's assessing on the way. You can make even more, or just as much, or even more of an impact with that person about you, your values, your culture, what you're all about, on that 2-minute walk to the room, in the conference centre, hotel, wherever it might be, as you can in delivering a 10-minute exercise that you're doing. So those moments are critically important, that you're on your mettle, not in a false way, but you're just yourself.
And just being a decent person. I mean, I can't remember what I was watching the other day, but there was a kind of spoof type thing where somebody was racing to go and get a taxi, and they pushed somebody out of the way to get the taxi. It was raining because they were going for an interview. Then they rock up to the interview, and the person they pushed out the taxi was the interviewer. Right. And I think, for me, if you're going for a coffee, or, let people into the queue, just be decent that morning, because you never do know. And, I think that's a theory for life generally anyway. But I think it's just about thinking about how you conduct yourself in and around that area, because you just don't know who you're going to come across.
I remember going for an interview in a shop in my retail career years ago, and walking down an aisle with an area manager, and there was a banana on the floor, and I just bent down and picked it up. I was surprised he didn't bend down and pick it up, to be honest. But for me, that's just what you do, and I've been in situations when waiting to go in for an interview, and a customer's asked you a question. Well, I don't actually work here, but I think it's over here, and do what you can to support and help. Just be yourself. It's just like everyday natural life stuff. But that's Matt. One question you've asked then about the assessment centres, and I think Darren, you've put on about maybe another session could be around assessment centres. Happy to take that feedback, because it's such a big topic, a huge topic. So it's a great shout. Matt, what percentage should you lead in a group exercise? Yeah, that's a. I would never take the role as scribe or script, because what you end up doing is almost being the person that just is listening and taking everyone's notes down and feeding back at the end, and you don't get the opportunity to be naturally yourself, to put your own perspectives in and your own feedback in. So I would always advise try and avoid at all costs that role, which might seem like a good one in a group exercise, but don't. Definitely avoid it. For me, it's about listening to others and then interjecting. That's a great point. I really think that's a great idea. Could we develop that and do this? Asking other questions. What do you think? If someone's not, so if Emma's being very quiet in a group exercise, unlikely, but she might be. She's putting her new tights on. Yeah. If she's been really quiet, then I might then say to Emma, Emma, you're looking like you've got, you're thinking about it. What do you think about this particular? So almost think about the best. For me, the best role in a group exercise is to be the leader and the go-between and the facilitator of ideas, and putting your own perspectives forward and adding to other people's stuff and complementing. That's a great idea, Adam. Fantastic. I really agree with that. And how could we? Anyone else? What could we do? So, but making sure at the same time you're putting your own ideas in as well. That for me is probably the best one. So I don't know, maybe a good 25% of the conversation is going through you. 25-30%. If you're doing too much and bossing everything and driving it all, then you get to be seen as that over communicator, one who doesn't listen to others. So fine balance. But Matt, great question, and Darren, I appreciate your point. We could definitely do something with that as a follow-on day. So
I'm conscious of time, and one of the things that we did have a lot of questions on is the fact that obviously more interviews are now being done online. And Adam, I know you've had some instances this week or last week, should I say, with people who have had some challenges from a technical point of view. So do you want to share some?
Yeah, I think there's, I guess, a couple of real live examples to start this week. One, a candidate who decided to, because it had been moved to video platform, decided to actually go into work and do it in the back office, which was then presented with a whole host of network issues, which resulted in him losing connection to the interviewing manager. And I guess there was a bit of that about actually, had he truly thought about the environment that he was conducting it in, and was it a stable environment? And also, to be fair, having signed in at the start of the interview, probably wasn't the right background and environment for him to be delivering it anyway. And I think it's a really important thing to think about when you are doing a video interview, with whether that's with an area manager or whoever it may be, is actually really think about your background and the environment that you are, and any distractions or interruptions. The second issue that I had, and they were both on the same day with the same area manager, which kind of made it even worse, but was part of the interview was competency interview followed by a presentation, and the candidate had made the assumption that actually they use Microsoft Teams day in, day out, and they knew what they were doing with it, and they'd done screen share and presented before from their laptop, but they were doing it on their iPad. So it then come to screen sharing the presentation and could not screen share for love and money. And actually that's that bit around, had he done a practice run using the equipment that he was using, actually probably wouldn't have encountered that. It
just comes back to great prep, absolutely great preparation. We've got we run training sessions for businesses on how to interview techniques. We've got one coming up in a couple of weeks' time, and they can't use Zoom, so we're going to move it to Teams. So we can do it on Teams. It's a little bit different. We're going to do a full road test of that next week, aren't we? And make sure that it works and we know exactly how it works, and come up with a set of instructions for the people who are going to be attending so that they know how it works as well. So it's just about preparation. I guess that's what we said, how to ace an interview. 90% of it is about preparation, because you'll then deliver the stuff in the right way ultimately, won't you? Absolutely. You'll deliver the stuff in the right way. I'm just looking if there's any other last minute questions. Thanks, Matt, for your comments at the end. Jacqueline, will there be a link to watch these top tips? So yes, this webinar will go live. You'll get a link to it and you'll be able to go back and watch it again, Jacqueline. So hopefully that'll help you. I know we've rattled off so many things and so many tips.
We always run out of time.
We always run out of time. We always will run out of time.
What's a suitable time? So Charlotte's asked, what's a suitable time frame to follow up on an interview?
Yeah, that's a pretty good one just to finish off on, really, isn't it?
Yeah, so I certainly would wait a day or so, and then kind of follow up. So it's useful just to be able to pop an email and say thanks ever so much for your time. Just reposition what you think you offer to the organisation, but don't be that that annoying person that is constantly saying when we're here. What I would say is make sure that you clarify in the interview, at the end of the interview, when you're closing, what's the next stage of the process and when am I likely to hear, so that you've got a time scale and you've got that kind of agreement with the individual. If they say you're not likely to hear for a couple of days, leave it a couple of days and then chase. So just get that agreement, I would say.
Well, I think the chase is more around just thought I'd drop you a quick email. Really enjoyed the interview the other day. I know you said it'd be a couple of days. I just thought I'd check in and see if there was any feedback. So it's not where's my feedback kind of directness. You've just got to manage that in an appropriate way. But fine, okay, brilliant. Can't believe the hour's gone already. We're over by about 2 minutes.
We've got loads still.
I know. But so we will send out a link to the webinar to you today. We will be putting another one on for sure. We'll take on your feedback that assessment centres might be a good one for that to do, Matt.
And if there's anything else that anybody wants us to talk about, and specifically, then please do send that in via email or LinkedIn or whatever's easiest. Yeah, we were going to try and cover at the end sort of negotiating offers. So, but again, that's maybe another one we can do where we can start to look at how do you negotiate offers? How do you take, once you've got roles or you've got a number of roles to make decisions on, that's perhaps something else we could do. But yeah, please send any more ideas or any more comments afterwards, and that will be really helpful. Yeah, and thanks for joining. Yeah, and enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Take care. Cheers, bye. Bye.